I want to go to my guests. I see him here. I am joined with the man himself, Mark Sleboda. Mark Sleboda is an international relations security analyst. You can follow Mark on Boosty, Boosty, either under Real Politic or just under his name. I found him under his name, Mark Sleboda. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay?
Jamaro, I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
I am alive, and I guess we are for the time being. We'll see what happens in the Middle East if nukes and other countries get involved. Mark, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask your take on that to start off before getting into what's happening in Russia right now, because Zelensky apparently is dying of thirst without media attention. He's putting out videos. It's like, dude, I need more money. Why are you guys fighting in the Middle East? You're screwing with my coke habit. But give me your take, just as a general overview on what is taking place in the Middle East. And I'm curious on something Alexander Dugan said. He pointed out, and I don't know if this is true, which is why I'm asking you, that Russia offered a security agreement with Iran in a similar fashion as they offered with North Korea. And Iran didn't want to accept it. For one, do you know if that's true? I don't know why Dugan would know that. And two, are we on the brink of nuclear oblivion?
Okay, so first of all, I have an enormous amount of respect for Professor Dugan. I used to work with him at Moscow State University. Yeah, I was for a couple of years within his, shall we say, inner circle. I don't agree with all of his views or opinions, but I agree with a lot of them. And even when I disagree with him, I have an enormous amount of respect for the man. However, I have to say that I heard him say this as well. And I have heard nothing, not even a whisper of anything else, anyone else, any official or non-official in Russia saying the same thing. And I also have no reason or wonder how he would know this, because he has an interest in presenting himself as a political insider, but he really is not. He does not have inside information from the Russian government. In fact, for years, he was a voice in the wilderness. In the aftermath of the Maidan events, he made some impassioned statements that were taken out of context, but nonetheless painted him in a bad way. And this was at a time that the Kremlin was pushing the Minsk agreements very hard. And as a result of that, he was removed from his position at Moscow State University in the sociology faculty. He was no longer appearing on state TV, on political talk shows or interviews or the like. And although since the assassination of his daughter and the Russian special military operation launching, he is no longer a voice in the wilderness, but that doesn't mean that he's a political insider either. So I doubt that the particulars of this are true. I know that I have heard reported that the Iranian parliament has, as of yet, still not ratified the strategic partnership between Russia and Iran. Really? Professor Dugan has suggested that there was an alliance offered. That I don't know if it, like say with North Korea, including a mutual defense clause. I doubt that. Something not dissimilar to that, the idea that Russia proposed access to military bases in Iran, and Iran dithered and said no, or never gave a firm answer. That is a possibility. I find that a much more realistic possibility. So
I see.
I can't rule out what Professor Dugan has suggested entirely, but I think probably there's a bit of hyperbole there. I think it's yeah, there still is. I mean, there are factions in Iran that in the Iranian government that don't like Russia. There are some elements within the broader Russian government that don't think much of Iran. There are still factions within the Russian government that would like to have good relations with Israel. There's a lot of former Soviet citizens, including from Russia in Israel. I mean, there's a very large Russian-speaking population in Israel. If you've watched a lot of videos of incoming Iranian missiles over the past week or the past few days anyway, into Israel, Tel Aviv, and elsewhere, you will doubtless stumble across many of them where the people taping them are speaking Russian. It's true. There's a lot of Russian immigrants there. And there, for years, Russia has cultivated has tried to maintain a business-like relationship with Israel, right? Without being, shall we say, bosom buddies, right? But there was, I believe, an attempt to understand Israel's position through the lens of a shared terrorist threat. I'm not so sure that the terrorist threat was exactly aligned, but there was that prism, and there was this strong lobby of Russian-speaking former Soviet immigrants in Israel. I know that there are Russian celebrities, Russian, shall we say, elite or former elite, who, when Russia launched the special military operation in Ukraine in 2022, left Russia, loudly proclaiming that they could not live in a country that attacked its neighbors, so they went to Israel.
That is comedy.
Cue the Russian internet collective laughter and derision, right? Yeah, that's hilarious, isn't it? Yeah,
that is comedy.
Try to find one of Israel's neighbors that they aren't bombing. Jordan, I guess, only because they're a U.S. quisling, right? So it's complicated, but at the end of the day, events in Syria, events since then have, I would say that geopolitical blocks have inevitably ended that business-like relationship between Russia and Israel. I think it's over. But
Russia has been very quiet.
They have not. President Putin condemned the attack of Israel on Iran and used those words. Those words were used. Those are strong words. Those are strong words he denounced, right? The attack. So I do not see actually that as being quiet at all.
And he called both Netanyahu and he contacted Pezeshkian.
Yes.
And said that he thinks both should go to the negotiating table.
Sure.
After Iran was viciously attacked.
Sure.
In an unprovoked attack.
And China, and Iran both say that there should be diplomatic resolution of the conflict in Ukraine. Let's acknowledge that there are diplomatic niceties in international relations, and stop always taking people literally at what they say, right? Right. So yes, I know you want to see Russian troops flying the flag. I don't. Israeli planes, perhaps mid-bit of Dr. Strangelove style, riding a Ereshnik down into Tel Aviv, right? Okay, Realism. Let's emotional response, right?
I
We
don't
all
think
agree.
that. Just to be clear, I don't think that.
Okay, all right.
I don't think that. What I
know
what I don't want.
there are people out there who you would, and I understand that. I have emotional responses myself, right? But let's try to think rationally, realist, in the realist prism, which is most of the time the best way to understand international relations in the toolkit.
Right.
And objectively, take your emotions, release them for a few seconds, yell in the shower, take whatever you have to do. But when you sit down, and you as an ordinary person, you're free to vent those on Twitter and whatever social media, Telegram you're using. Yeah, you can go off and why isn't Russia and China immediately nuking the US because of this? Whatever. I mean, that's free, that's fair. You're allowed to do that. But as analysts, as journalists, I think we need to acknowledge that emotional response, and then
just be clear. I don't think that. My issue, and if I'm going to present what my thinking on this, if the U.S. gets involved, and the U.K. gets involved, and Germany gets involved, which they already are, by the way, but the catch becomes whether the U.S. gets involved directly, militarily, meaning bombing Iran. Does Russia and China stand there and watch? It's that.
Okay,
it's just
so that. I do not believe that Russia and China would stand there and watch. I do not necessarily believe that the correct response to that would be descending Russian and Chinese aircraft or troops to Iran, but certainly you'll see a more open and robust response. You might see economic measures taken, right? You might see Russia and China leveling sanctions against the United States and Israel. That's a very real possibility. Always remember that Russia and China and Iran and others have limitations, right? They have geopolitical horizons.
Right.
And the United States is still the first among great powers with a greater predominance of military force directed specifically, for the purpose of power projection around the world. That's why they have 800 to 1,000 plus military bases around the world to facilitate that power projection. Russia and China have built up their militaries, yes, and their militaries are making enormous progress, but they are still primarily constructed to provide defense and working towards control of their near abroad, right? Of their immediate adjacent sphere of influence, if you want to say. And neither Russia nor China have a lot of military power that could easily be directed into a superpower conflict. And we don't want that, because you know how easily those things would go nuclear? No, we don't. No. So, yes, absolutely, Russia and China would not leave Iran hanging any more than Iran has left Russia hanging in Ukraine. But look at the amount of support that Iran has provided Russia and expect that Russia will provide more support than that to Iran if the situation starts becoming existential for Iran, i.e. threatening the government of Iran. But be realistic about Russia and China's capabilities, their aversion to leading to anything that would cause a nuclear conflict. And, if worst came to worst and the Iranian government fell, and that obviously is the U.S. and Israeli endgame here, right? That's what they're pushing for. I think we should come back to that in a moment. This nonsense about nuclear, that's a pretext, right? Israel has been warning since 1984, headlines in Israeli newspapers, that Iran is just, days, weeks, months, whatever it is, away from developing a nuclear weapon. Netanyahu, that has been his bugaboo right, that he yells about routinely since 1993, right? That's 32 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been
32
like 40
years.
years.
He's
Yeah.
been beating that dead horse. 30. We've all seen the videos of him at the UN with the cartoonish board, the bomb, and every all his games. This is a pretext. The U.S. intelligence and the International Atomic Energy Agency have both on record stated that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program.
Right.
They are entitled under international law and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to enrich uranium. They had an agreement with the U.S., with Russia as a co-guarantor, to limit the amount of their enrichment of uranium as, on one hand, as a method of ensuring that they did not at some point later down the road develop a nuclear weapons program, and on Iran's side to remove Western punitive sanctions against Iran. Donald Trump ripped that up during his first administration, presumably for, take your reason, whether it was pleasing Netanyahu, who didn't want to see that deal passed in the beginning, or just despite Obama, because that was his principal foreign policy legacy. But Biden never renewed it, right? Despite the Blinken-Sullivan administration avoiding direct war with Iran, or even avoiding an Israeli war with Iran during his 4 years. Donald Trump has obviously jumped right into that. In the first few, we're still in the first months of this man's presidency.
It's 8 months? It's
amazing that people expected. I don't know what people expected something better out of Trump 2.0. I never quite understand. Hope dies eternal.
Hope springs eternal. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't for me, because I think hope is the mind killer. But I know Dune says fear is the mind killer, right, Frank Herbert? But as far as I'm concerned,
so you're Frank Herbert fan too. That man is a god. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I agree. I love it myself. I've read it, cut my teeth on it as a young teenager. Yeah, but I think hope is the mind killer. So that it's obviously the goal is regime change here, right? This is the nuclear weapons is a pretext, and this is the real. We've heard statements from Netanyahu now directly to that effect.
Yep.
And here, there's a great piece just came out a couple days ago. Calling a spade in Politico by a anti, to be fair, an anti-Iranian perennial, Nahal Tusi. What's Israel's end game? Israel's true target must be much larger than Iran's nuclear program. And then down in the article, he says, yeah, I'll say it, regime change. It's a phrase that normally sends shudders through a Washington and a Middle East chastened by the U.S. experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a concept that has long left President Donald Trump extremely wary. Blah, blah, blah. His administration has already put out word it played no role in the attack. And the Israeli government hasn't declared that regime change is its official objective. But then he parses what they said, what they've done, what they're doing. It's regime change. I think we all agree on that.
It's obvious, right?
The decapitation strike, striking political military figures, calls for the Iranian people to rise up and free themselves from tyranny, to turn themselves into cannon fodder tools for Zionism. That's unfortunately.
I saw a liberal woman. Oh, go ahead. No, please. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the Israel, Israeli intelligence, and probably to a lesser extent the CIA and MI6 have enormous penetration of Iran, right?
Yes.
Whether we're talking the government, the military, the intelligence and security services, society. We've long known that they have a network of sympathizers, minority ethnic separatists, terrorists, mercenaries, right? We've got the U.S. is still thus far sitting on the MEK, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, these crazy people that the U.S. formerly recognized as terrorists for killing Americans, but then decided were a useful weapon. They're still chilling in Albania, as far as I know, but I'm sure they are on the activization short list if they haven't already been activated. We've seen these Operation Spiderweb type drone squads operating. That's no longer a question, right? Trucks carrying drones have been intercepted. Drone construction shops have been caught. I'm sure there's many more out there, operatives. There is still assassinations going on. There is sabotage going on. Even in Tehran, supposedly the sewage plants were destroyed, flooding streets in at least some areas with sewage. And I am far, far more worried about the internal threat that Mossad has and other Western intelligence agencies have obviously cultivated in Iran, right, than I am about outside airstrikes. The airstrikes are simply meant to create a political crisis situation within the country for the internal threat to do its work. And I think that's important to be understood. Now, what I have seen thus far does not rise to the level of regime change, right? Not even anywhere close. But is this all they've got? Do they still have aces up their card to pull out of their sleeve at some point in this, right? We've already known that they intend to continue this for a total of, at least originally, from some 14 days they were talking about.
Good luck.
But doubtless that's going to be extended into the future. But that is what I'm more worried about. Airstrikes are not going to destroy or bring down the Iranian government. The threat that Mossad, that the Western intelligence has cultivated within Iran, is much more serious, right? And everything else is meant to create the conditions for that to be properly activated and do its work.
Yeah, I agree with you. The fifth column thing has been significant. I mean, Iran has captured a few of these people, but obviously there's more.
Look at Syria.
Yeah.
What happened in Syria, right? The Syrian military was co-opted. And lots of officials, right? Government officials, local officials, clan leaders, whatever, in Syria were co-opted and bought out, and they stood down. And Al-Qaeda, just with barely a fight, walked through to Damascus. That is the real.
But say that doesn't happen, and say that the Iranian government remains intact. It seems Israel's getting weaker in their capability of hitting Iran, whereas Iran is getting stronger in their capability of hitting Israel. For God's sake, they were hitting them in the daytime with drones. Yeah. And the US, UK, effectively NATO, has exposed their hand in this and has moved ships closer with the notion of potential direct strikes on Iran itself.
Yeah, like there's two U.S. carrier groups steaming for the Middle East right now.
So the question becomes, the level of pressure that's going to be on Donald Trump to get militarily involved is going to be overwhelming.
I don't think we need to talk about pressure, right? Yeah. Donald Trump has been in on this from the beginning. His increasingly, absolutely unhinged, right, lunatic, bloodthirsty tweets about Iran. This man is batshit insane and dangerous, right? Yes. Forget madman theory. This man is a madman, right?
Child with a gun.
Yeah. I mean, a vicious little child with a gun, right?
Yep.
And an ego.
And got it wrong. It seems, if you look at his tweets, they're all over the place. Like they're deranged. You get
Yeah, they're
Marco
deranged.
Rubio who comes,
Unhinged.
yeah, Marco Rubio comes out and says, we don't have anything to do with this, which is
Right.
effectively the playbook, right? Pretend as if you don't have anything to do with it, despite the fact that they're your proxy.
I mean,
Then Trump
you've
comes out.
had Brian Berletic on before, plenty of times.
Yeah.
And one thing that
Brian is right.
he has stayed crystal his focus on is that 2009 Brookings paper, Which Path to Persia, and leave it to Bibi as a subheading, right? Talking about how to get the regime change and exactly pretending a diplomatic process and letting Israel take the charge and only coming in later if necessary. I mean, it's spelled out right there. I mean,
but the problem is it makes no sense in reality. Right? Meaning it's one thing to write it on paper. In reality, it's different because the U.S. would have to distance itself from Israel, which it just can't do. You're paying 80 to 90%. A week ago, 2 weeks ago, they were arguing at the ICJ that Israel has a right to starve 2 million people. So it's like, okay, how do you do this? And then Donald Trump comes out and crows like, hey, we told you this was going to happen. You should have taken the deal, which effectively destroys any notion
this mafia style art of the deal. You agree to what I say, or I break your leg and burn down. I used to say your cousin's house, but now it's your house, right? I mean, the
problem is that Iran was not a soft target in the way that they thought Iran was. No. And then his tweets neither was Russia. And now his tweets have gotten insane from crowing to like, America has nothing to do with this. Don't attack American forces. It's like, okay, but
as he sends American forces into the region.
Yeah, as he sends American forces into the region. That's what I mean. Like, this is deranged, right?
Yeah.
So America will get involved.
Almost. First of all, America is involved. Let's be clear.
What I mean is, just so I nailed down my words. Direct military intervention, not leaving it to Israel. Israel is getting smashed. America will bring in American bombers.
Yeah.
Good.
Right now, the U.S. is refueling Israeli planes over Syrian airspace, right? Because Israel lacks enough refueling capacity to sustain the intensity of the airstrike campaign. That is an objective fact. It can't be denied. That is active military assistance. The attacks could not continue without that. Secondly, the U.S. and the entirety of the West have all of their satellites. They're shifting their focus from Ukraine, further north and a little bit to the west, right, to provide real-time military intelligence, satellite information on what's going on, right? And it cannot be underestimated how important that is, right, for these types of, particularly these types of long-range strikes, right? Absolutely essential. Israel does not have the satellite capacity alone for this. And third, right, all of the munitions involved, of course, come clearly from the U.S. And the U.S. and the West are already active providing air defense for Israel. So Israel can attack Iran, but if Iran, don't you dare Iran attack Israel back, or we're in on it. This is right now for Israel and the U.S. have a complicated relationship where they overlap and they're symbiotic with each other. Israel influences the U.S. uses Israel, right? It's not clear cut that one is the puppet master controlling the other, right? It's not that simple. But it is clear at this point that Israel is getting part of what they want, and they have the hopes of getting it all. And the United States is using Israel for their geopolitical purposes as a proxy, Ukraine in this regard. If they have to get directly involved, yes, they will. But they had hopes, at least, that Israel would be able to handle it on their own, and that doesn't seem to be the case. So what we're looking at right now, it is a long-range, the asymmetrical warfare aside, which is definitely highly tilted in Israel's favor right now, because the axis of resistance over the last year, 2 years, has been mauled, right? Let's be clear about that. Hezbollah survived, but mauled. Hamas continues to survive fighting for its existence, but mauled.
Mauled.
Even the Houthis over the last, between U.S., Israeli and British airstrikes, have been mauled, right? Their ability to project power, has it exists. They continue to take pot shots at Israel, right? Missiles fired, but they're not terribly effective, right? Their ability to do those long range strikes has been inhibited, right? So the axis of resistance is weak. Syria is gone, right? The country that was formerly known as Syria, if you want to call it Al-Qaedistan, if you want to call it the reborn Islamic State, whatever it is, Israel flies freely over its skies without the threat of Russian-provided Syrian air defense, right? And that was obviously a key building block to this exact attack. Without that, this attack could not occur. Notice that Saudi Arabia is distancing itself quite strongly from all of this. Saudi Arabia condemned the attacks.
Look at mouth says.
That's a change. So long range strikes. This is another war of attrition right now, without victory within a few days. And they're two different, right? Both sides have different capabilities, but primarily the Israeli power is, their method is long range airstrikes, missiles fired by aircraft, mostly over Iraqi airspace. There's claims, lots of claims about them operating over Iranian airspace. If they are, it's still to a limited degree. Whereas Iran's strength is missiles and drones, right? And so we're seeing volleys exchanged. And this is like, I don't want to say heavyweight, but this is like midweight boxers just plowing away at each other for a few rounds.
Hitting.
It's really difficult to do a proper damage assessment to judge at this moment who has the upper hand. But there was some surprise element in the beginning, right? Obviously, Iran seems to have not been fully prepared. They were lulled by Donald Trump seeming to continue with negotiations to some degree. There was reports of a massive cyber attack taking out parts of Iranian air defense. We had these drones and operated from within, also going after air defense in Iran. We had these decapitation strikes, right? All of this happened right away. And the fact that all of those principal people were in vulnerable positions in the Iranian government was
shocking.
It's shocking. It's an intelligence. It's a security failure. There's no question. And that's why I say I'm so worried about the internal threat more than the external threat. But in its own way, what's going on right now, if we lead the asymmetric effect to the side, is a war of attrition being carried out in the skies with long-range strikes. And ultimately, we know that Iran has we don't know exactly how many and how many are more modern, how many are older, but we know Iran has an enormous stockpile of ballistic missiles, right? Supposedly some hypersonic missiles, right? Cruise missiles, but also of long-range drones. We know that Israel has been expending a lot of military, of air missiles and assets and air defense assets over the last year, right? Airstrikes in Lebanon, airstrikes in Yemen, the U.S. right alongside it there. And we know that the U.S. has already suffering shortage, a critical shortage, being unable to provide air defense missiles for the Kiev regime in Ukraine, and being unable to properly carry through on the Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement in Yemen, so just declaring victory and leaving, right?
Right.
Ultimately, the production of ballistic missiles is always cheaper and easier than the production of air defense missiles, right? Ballistic launchers, easier than air defense launchers. So the math, right? And now both sides are having their air defense stressed, tested, and destroyed. That's That's happening unquestionably. Both sides have had a degree of success, right? I've increasingly heard the Iron Dome referred to as an iron sieve, but this is
Iron
what
Dome means an Iron
a
Dome.
saturation. This is what a saturation effect does to a air defense network. And let's be honest, as we see the missiles coming in, we know that many more were stopped, right? But that ability is going to degrade over time, right? They're going to be running out of air defense missiles. They're going to be running out of air defense launchers too, because Iran, of course, is targeting the launchers as well, and the U.S. ability to resupply them. Again, the Patriots. The U.S. makes 550 Patriot missiles a year. That's it.
Even less of the THAAD, by the way. Even less
of
of that.
A couple dozen,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? And they have to supply Ukraine and Israel and all of themselves and all of their allies that use air defense missiles. Air defense is the U.S.'s Achilles heel, which is why I didn't believe that they were stupid enough to get involved in this conflict. But they did it anyway, right?
Yeah.
Despite this weakness. Iran has already demonstrated that they have significant long-range strike capability with ballistic missiles and drones, and yet you go there.
Look, I kept saying I would bring military analysts on, and I was like, but they do understand that Israel is going to get torched, right? And they say, yes, Israel knows that. And I guess the thought is, well, the U.S. eventually will get dragged in as Israel is being pummeled.
Dragged in. I love this euphemism.
Yeah, this is the way they use it, right?
The U.S. is not dragged into any conflicts. The U.S. is a behemoth that drags conflicts on chains around with it as it travels like some kaiju around the planet. Right? Let's be clear about that. The U.S.
I would say, though, that I think that Donald Trump was stupid enough. Whoever was the last person in the room he was talking to was like, Israel can handle it.
Yeah.
With that person knowing Israel can't handle it, we will get pulled in.
The Tulsi Gabbard is not doing her job.
No.
The Pentagon, well, although she did come out with this weird statement last week saying that there's people walking us into World War III. So maybe that was a cry from within the deep state that she has obviously found herself imprisoned in. But the Pentagon is also not doing their job. I mean, I've come to the conclusion, listening to these recently ex-generals, whether they're Mark Milley or Mike Hodges, that U.S. generals are idiots. I mean, they really are. They have such an inflated opinion of the U.S. military, and they underestimate other countries' militaries to such a degree.
I keep saying it.
They live in a fantasy land. They live in a fantasy land. And this is playing out now. So I think it's possible that Iran has the long-range strike, if we're talking damage tally, upper hand right at the moment. But increasingly, I believe that is going to, if the conflict continues, to tilt in Iran's direction. Again, ballistic missiles, cheaper than air defense missiles, right? And you can be sure that Russia and China and possibly others, Pakistan's opening their mouth for some reason, and not that anyone wants them to help. Let's be honest.
You think so? Iran is going to take any help it can get right now.
Yeah, right. But that would drag India's already screamed that then they would get involved, and we really don't want that. That would be a permanent
India is already involved. Many of the people who they caught were Indian nationals, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. I
have not heard that.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong.
I would not doubt that there are Indian, just Islamophobes that would get involved for that particular.
I can be wrong. I need to confirm that, so I'll take that back.
Yeah, I would not be surprised. I'm just saying that I haven't heard that myself.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that necessarily that the Indian government is involved. Right. Okay. So, so long range strikes right now, a war of attrition. Ultimately, if this continues, right, without dragging us into a wider geopolitical conflict. Right now, this is a regional conflict,
Right.
seated inside a geopolitical proxy war, right? Because this is just like Ukraine, quickly becoming, maybe it was always going to be, another potential world order changing conflict, because the United States is backing Israel. And their goal here is regime change in Iran to maintain and extend U.S.-led Western global hegemony across the Middle East. They've already removed Syria. We all know those 7 countries on the list that Wesley Clark pointed out. Not that he's a good guy or anything, but Libya, Iraq, Syria, right? And now we're on to Iran.
Iran, yep.
So that's their goal. But Russia and China are both strategic partners of Iran. And again, although that does not mean that Russian and Chinese troops, paratroopers or whatever coming into Tehran, they are going to provide military technical assistance. They are going to maintain economic ties. They are going to provide a high degree of assistance. Like with Syria, Russia and Iran couldn't maintain the Syrian government if the Syrian people just gave up, right? If there was no support. But I hope, I hate, am I using that word? I don't believe at this moment I have seen enough signs that, however worm-ridden with Mossad the Iranian government and society is, that they're that worm-ridden enough that it would mean government, that it would mean regime change. And as long as that is not the case, then Russia and China will not give up backing Iran. I think most of us have already seen the reports of Chinese cargo planes flying into Iran, turning transponders off. We know the Chinese were providing effective air-to-air missiles to Pakistan, and we can argue in that situation about whether that was correct. But that is the geopolitical proxy war, right? And again, you have the great powers of a nascent multipolar world. Russia and China and Iran would be the third, they're not quite a great power yet, but there is a rising regional power on one hand, and we have the US-led West and Israel on the other, right? And they're both providing military intelligence, one to Israel, one to Iran, potentially providing armaments on both sides. This is proxy war. And then the only question is, does it go direct? And I think this was a huge mistake by the Trump administration, right? I know there were people from the beginning that wanted exactly this, and obviously they've got their way. And I don't know what Trump is thinking at any given moment or any 15 moments, but it doesn't really matter because Trump obviously doesn't have control of his own government. Right. I think that's clear. He's a child, and he has to, like in his first administration, like John Bolton, he is continually being manipulated and pushed around by his handlers, the neocons that he has gathered around him. Right. So
that's assuming this is not his own point of view. I am not of mind that this is not necessarily his own point of view.
I don't think that's important, right? If you want to keep telling yourself that Donald Trump is a good person and he's being manipulated by the evil boyars, knock yourself out. I think both are. I think he's being manipulated and that Donald Trump is not a good person, right?